Human brain is naturally about 75% negative. You survive by being pessimistic. Once bitten by a snake, you're scared of ropes. People succeed either if they're coachable or if they work really hard. I was raised to work really hard, and I think I'm coachable.
Never get emotional about money. You cannot be a trader and trade billions of dollars of stock and ever get emotional about the situation.
Loss is the single biggest decision-making factor of human beings.
You learn way more from failure than you do from success. What is our truth going to be when we start asking a machine for the answer to some of our most inner thoughts and our inner emotions?
Logic is like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. We decide based on what we value.
Welcome back to the Money Signal podcast from Main Street to Wall Street. Today, I am honored to be sitting with the two most famous men in their own respective industry and have our first podcast guest, Chris Voss. Welcome, Chris, to our podcast.
Welcome.
A privilege to be here.
It's an incredible honor to have you both and be sitting here with you both. I would love to talk about three things today, and they're all related to each other. They are people, pressure, and patterns. And I'll tell you a bit more about that idea.
All right. Okay.
Chris here to my left is a negotiator. He can probably negotiate you out of anything, Peter, because you have crazy ideas. He deals with people with psyche, empathy, and understanding the human psychology. Pressure, on the other hand, is to my right side, Mr. Einstein, the only Einstein of Wall Street, who deals with pressure on a constant, daily, minute, probably second-by-second basis,
Right.
with very highs and very lows. And these things actually relate to each other. So people, pressure, and how you manage the two. So this is more of a conversation for you guys, and I'm only here to help facilitate it.
Mediate the conversation. We're here to help negotiate the conversation.
I'm here to help with that. When it comes to the last part of the conversation, which is patterns, this is where I would love to teach you guys a bit more about the patterns that I see, especially because both of you are now in the digital space, where we live in a very, very digitalized era, where human behavior and people's thoughts and pressure and patterns come out in the data. Right. So I'm happy to talk about that part first. Okay, but let's start off with
let me jump in for a quick second, because I think what's really fascinating is we started to talk a little bit about social media, and obviously Chris is a negotiator, but going back to an era where things were really, it was the human element was the key, I would think, to your, how you understood people, the psychology of human beings and how they related to other people. And we talked for a moment about the way our business started, about the way the floor of the stock exchange was. We traded open outcry. It was an auction market. It was one human being with another human being, and how we mentioned how, and it really made me just start to think about how does one negotiate. What makes a good broker on the floor of the stock exchange, not an upstairs trader. It's a different thing. There's a differentiation between upstairs traders and floor brokers. We're sort of boots on the ground. We're the ones in the heat of the battle, at the point of execution of where stocks are actually bought and sold. And in an open outcry marketplace, right, I walk into a crowd and I say, how is it? And the market maker will say, it's a quarter for $250,000. There's 3 buyers there, 1 who's a market order, 2 are limited. We have a seller up at a half. What do you want to do? And then based on the instructions I'm being given by my customer, basically he may tell me, I want to be aggressive. I just want to buy it. I don't care what anyone else is doing. I want you to go along. Go in there and read the room. Tell me what you see.
Right.
And so what made me good at what I did was I could go in there, and sometimes I wouldn't even tell anybody what I was doing. I'm just sort of observing. And I would listen, because people tell so much with their body language, right? This guy, you could tell he was a little edgy. Maybe he had a big order. He wasn't sure what to do. This guy was an open book. I mean, each person had their own, how their personality comes through in the art of negotiation. So I would ask you that question, is when you, let's put you in, let's just say, what was your first sort of really, when you were thrown, obviously to be a negotiator, you obviously have to have those skills, but when did you cut your teeth in that, when you realized that you were really good at what you were doing, and that the world did as well?
Well, I get good at it because I worked at it. I think if anything else, I'm coachable. I like to learn. People succeed either if they're coachable or if they work really hard. I was raised to work really hard, and I think I'm coachable. You don't have to be particularly smart. You just got to want to learn, and if you work hard, that accelerates it. But I adapted to it because I wanted to learn a skill. I was told to go volunteer on a suicide hotline. And if you follow the training, you read that you referred to earlier, you're reading instantly. You're reading tone of voice. And then it becomes a dance to some degree where you let the other side lead. However, the one big difference is you begin to learn that you're looking for indicators. And the indicators are always going to be the same. And we learn the hard way that people are driven their behavior principally through negative thinking and loss. Those are always the biggest decision-making factors.
Explain that. Be a little more detailed.
Well, first of all, your brain's wired to be negative. So the survival brain is roughly human brain is naturally about 75% negative. That's the way you survive. You survive by being pessimistic.
Right.
Once bitten by a snake, you're scared of ropes.
Right.
The optimistic caveman got eaten. Yeah, I'm an optimist. I know my friend went in that cave yesterday and never came out, but I'm an optimist. I'm going in today. That guy got eaten. Yeah. He's got no survivors.
Right.
So the pessimists survived to start with.
Wow.
And then 2002, Danny Kahneman, Nobel Prize, behavioral economics, prospect theory, loss stings twice as much as an equivalent gain.
Right.
So we got a set of rules. My colleague Jonathan over here, the co-author of Fight Less, Win More, we call them the laws of negotiation gravity. And one of the principal rules is loss is the single biggest decision-making factor of human beings. Not the only thing that they weigh to make decisions.
Right.
But you start with the single biggest factor is going to be loss.
Can I, is that like fair? So I always talk when I do speaking about empowerment and we talk about you learn way more from failure than you do from success, right? I mean,
if you learn, yeah, true.
If you learn, okay, let's start under the premise that I always talk about it. Humility to me means somebody who's teachable.
Yes,
right.
agreed.
That's what you have, and I think I'm really humble. I'm just ask me, I'll tell you how right how humble I am. But I mean that's a curious thing. So is loss similar to failure? Or loss meaning of emotional loss, physical?
No, well, that's a really interesting distinction because at some point in time when you turn the corner and you're learning, you don't look as loss as a failure. The classic line from the poem, if you can beat victory and defeat and treat those two imposters exactly the same. That's when failure is an emotional interpretation.
Right.
You lose $10. There's no emotional interpretation. You lost $10.
Right.
Now, if that's a failure, that's an emotional interpretation.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But loss being twice as much as stings hurt twice as much as a gain. As a hostage negotiator, before I ever got on the phone, we said whoever we're talking to, they've experienced some sort of a loss, depending upon the circumstances. If they're barricaded, it's going to be a loss in the last 48 hours. If they're a terrorist or if it's a kidnapping, then it's a deep loss. So that's what you're smelling for from the very beginning. You don't come in with a completely open mind. Right. You come in knowing what the parameters of human behavior are.
Right.
And so the first thing to sniff out is what's the loss.
Okay. So how deep it is and what's the depth of it?
What's the depth of it? How much did it affect their identity?
Right.
There are a number of things that are more important than survival. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is wrong. The number one need is not to survive.
Really? What is it?
Autonomy.
Independence.
Interesting.
And first, do I have autonomy? And then secondly, do I have agency? And so, and both of those have to do with loss.
Right.
And a lot of people that want to say, well, I'm not sure. I say, okay, cite to me one civilization in the history of mankind that was content in slavery.
Right.
That's autonomy.
Right.
Now, just because the American phrase is give me liberty or give me death,
right.
We didn't invent that. We inherited that from people that came from civilization cultures around the world. We didn't invent the willingness to die to preserve our autonomy.
Right.
It is a human condition.
Okay.
So I'm going to start dialing into you early on. I want to know the decisions that you're making. First, how it affected your autonomy. And then your agency, can you do anything about it? And that's going to tell me about you on a very deep level if I'm looking for it very, very quickly.
And is logic even part of any of this?
Logic
Where does
is-
logic sit?
Logic in Star Trek, Mr. Spock, logic is a butterfly flying in the breeze. Logic is a beautiful picture that smells really bad. Logic is like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. We decide based on what we value, which makes decisions emotional processes. So all decisions are based on emotion. Now we create the logic after the fact that supports our decision making. And so however you want to call it, the lizard brain, the monkey mind, the alligator brain, the subconscious will feed you a decision, and then your brain will go, okay, well that makes sense for this reason, this reason, this reason. Then you construct your logic after the fact. But gut instinct is all emotion and experience.
Very interesting. Now, question back to you.
Yeah.
In high pressure moments when you're trading literally billions of dollars,
Right.
where does logic sit in your mind and decision making?
Wow. It's a really good question because there's all different kinds of, I can bring it back to, lately we have a new trading system. We have a customer who's given us a whole bunch of money and they've given my son sort of a blank check to trade. And so I'm watching, and I trained my son to trade, and he learned through technical analysis. He learned through, he was able to acquire some of those skills. Think about it. A lot of the younger people, why is there's this new democratization of the trading community? Suddenly when COVID came along, you had 50 million new traders showed up, right? The minute that the doors were open, the accessibility came into the market, right? With Robinhood and Webull, right? When COVID came, before COVID, right? You had to be an accredited investor to enter this party, right? And everyone was excluded from this party. Then suddenly COVID came along and there was accessibility given, right? The red ropes were down. Everyone was given an opportunity and given access to a market. They were not given any kind of an emotional. There was no educational component to it, right? But think about it. They came into this business through the gamification. Think about younger people today. Like, I've never traded a video game in my life. Have you traded video games? You never did that, right? But have you? No. Right. Have you?
Yes.
You have. Okay, you're younger than us. But younger people, right? I mean, there's the whole gamification of trading. People are really adept at that kind of a thing. That's a different kind of a mind, right? That is able to, get blown, right? You go, and then you get blown up. Right, something is making them, go thinking. It's kind of curious to me because there's like a little lack of fear, right? That if you're constantly assuming life is anything like a video, like I always say, life's not like a video game, right? You're going to blow up, and you're not going to just be able to game over, start again, put in another quarter.
Right.
I'm going off on a tangent, but when I'm trading the market, I trade other people's money. Okay, that's a different mindset than if I'm trading my own money, right? And there's this old line, if you look back at the first Wall Street movie with Michael Douglas and Charlie Sheen, which was the story of Ivan Boesky. Ivan Boesky was a gentleman who claimed that he was hearing voices. He was having premonitions that somebody was telling him that these takeovers were going to happen. And he would buy up millions of shares of stock, and then the stock would be taken over and he'd make millions of dollars. It turned out that he had a rabbi up at Goldman Sachs named Dennis Levine who was giving him inside information. That was the voices he was hearing. Okay, but there's a scene in that movie where Charlie Sheen, who had been sent out by Gordon Gekko to go out and find inside information, where he says he's turning it back on him, and he's going, because he ends up getting screwed, and he says, never get emotional about money, right? I think it's important that you cannot be a trader and trade billions of dollars of stock and ever get emotional about the situation. I would imagine that has a lot of bearing on you as well, right? When you're talking to someone, for some reason, I'm going back to like Dog Day Afternoon. For some reason, I'm thinking, when I think of negotiation, I think of a bank robbery, right? A bank robber goes in, takes some hostages, right? That's just the most simple thing for my mind, right? I mean, obviously, or Pelham 1 2 3. I mean, think of some of the obviously, negotiating. I negotiate for in a financial terms. You're negotiating with people's lives. Big difference, right? But getting emotional about the situation, obviously you've got to detach yourself emotionally from it, I assume. Is that correct? I mean,
all right, so I'll draw a couple fine lines, because whenever anybody talks about getting emotional, they're principally talking about fear, which is a negative emotion.
Yeah.
Now, you kind of want to keep your positive emotions in check, but you're 31% smarter in a positive frame of mind. My site is a gentleman who, on a TED Talk, I think The Happy Secret to Better Work, a Harvard psychologist, highly recommend the TED Talk, and I got a mental block on his name. But that's my source.
Okay.
And so then if that's true, if you're 31% smarter in a positive frame of mind, then when you're in a negative frame of mind, you're by definition dumber.
You're dumber.
At least 31%.
Right. Is that because emotion's being brought into the situation?
Well,
negativity is a response, right?
You don't trade your own money because you're afraid to lose it.
Yeah, correct.
And so if you're trading other people's money, ideally then you lose most of that fear. And what you're trying to do is eliminate the negative so you can positively read. Now, the flip side is curiosity, one of the things you've talked about earlier, is a highly positive state of mind. Wow. And if you're totally curious, then you process information faster. You see patterns more quickly.
You're teachable.
You're teachable. Stephen Collier talks about the mindset of flow, where you take in more information. It's your highest state of being. Flow is so highly positive, it borders on euphoria. And you see patterns quickly, and you don't get mentally fatigued. And if you're in flow, or the other neurochemicals that are triggering your brain, then you have more endurance. The difference between ordeal and adventure is attitude. If you're on an adventure, this is great. Oh yeah, that's going on over here. That's going on over here. I can see the pattern here. I can see the pattern. That guy, if you're on the trading floor, that guy's reacting this way. I've seen him do that before. You're pulling in all this information. If you're trading on the floor and you were really picking everything up, I guarantee you felt great.
Right. Yeah. It was you
were in flow.
Not me. That chaos, organized chaos, that adrenaline. Those for that's why I always say that this was not made for everybody. Right. If you're somebody who woke up, had a coffee, read the paper, and you need to all gear up to get ready, well, then being a trader is not for you. If you're somebody who hears a bell ring and you're like a thoroughbred horse out of the gate, and that's what you thrive on, then that's your job. I mean, you obviously
you're describing positive emotion.
Positive emotion. I love that. First of all, but it's curious though. I love it when it pertains to a human interaction. See, I don't even own a computer, right? I am a completely counter tech person, right? If I was the last person to actually adopt the handheld computer on the floor, they said to me,
"Still got that Gordon Gekko phone thing?"
I absolutely do. You know what? Remember that? That was a great phone. I love that when it's a human to human interaction. That's what I thrive off of, right? And that's because it's that's like, think about that machine learning, right? I mean, and AI. I mean, these are sort of the next phase of all this stuff. I have a curious story. I'll tell you. I interviewed a lady who she's actually was giving a TED Talk. It was one of the women I introduced you to, but she had talked about that she was paying for her father. She had an old father. He was in his 80s, and she was paying for him to get therapy because he was going through some hard times. And suddenly she noticed that he wasn't spending that money anymore. And she called him and said, well, "Are you not having therapy anymore?" And she said, "You know what? I just canceled the shrink that you introduced me to. I'm just asking ChatGPT for the answers to my question." And so she suddenly had this epiphany moment, like, what is our truth going to be when we start asking a machine for the answer to some of our most inner thoughts and our inner emotions, right? I mean, do we think that they're ever going to use a ChatGPT or AI to determine how do I talk these hostages out of a situation?
Great question.
Well, ChatGPT, the AIs, when you talk to them, they're never in a bad mood. They're never tired.
Okay.
Most people get tired, they get worn out. They're in a bad mood. They can't process the information.
Right.
I'll do a commercial. because we talked about my masterclass earlier.
Yeah.
So masterclass has a Chris Voss AI.
Okay.
You could call and talk to Chris Voss.
Right.
And masterclass's feedback is a lot of people are having very deep conversations with the masterclass Chris Voss.
Really.
Wow.
Because he's responding in an emotionally intelligent way.
Right.
And he's always in a good mood. And, you call me at 11 o'clock at night, and I'll be like, look, leave me alone. I got to get a good night's
grumpy,
sleep.
right.
I don't want to talk to you right now.
Right.
Call me in the morning after I've had my coffee. Maybe then I'll talk. Well, the masterclass AI is never grumpy.
Exactly.
Amazing. This is where technology is coming in so fast, and it's literally taking over, every part of the journey. Now, I actually had a question for you that I was saving for later, but I'm going to ask it now because it ties perfectly. And that is, in a hostage negotiation conversation, I'm talking before ChatGPT and before social media,
Right.
What will be the data that you actually look for to understand about the person who is taking the hostages, or basically the bad actor? What are those first data sets that you had access to or needed in order to understand who you're negotiating with? And did you actually have them?
Well, no, I'm looking for the same things. I'm looking for the loss, and then I'm looking for, are they going to interact with me? That the most critical piece of information will always be, will they interact with me? Like completely separate from the circumstances. There were plenty of circumstances where people say, this dude is never coming out. And he engages with the hostage negotiator, and the negotiator talks him out. So, and I can remember a friend of mine in Florida, there was a guy that had committed a homicide, and he was HIV positive while it was still killing people. And the person that he killed was in the house with him. So there's no question that he's gonna be held accountable for the homicide. Like, this dude's got no reason for coming out.
Right.
They talked him out. So will the other guy engage? And that's why when I start out, my first thing that I say is going to be far less important than how you react to what I say. Like, every hostage negotiator that was any good, everybody's scripting the first statement, but it's really how the bad guy responds to the statement. Now, as long as I come in unexpectedly, what do I mean by unexpectedly? Bad guy's going to expect me to be all worried about the hostages. First, focus on a hostage. Is everybody in there?
Right.
How are the hostages? Are they okay? And a friend of mine, brilliant, Vince D'Alfonso, that I worked with, his line was to call in, and as soon as the bad guy answered, say, "Are you okay?
Are you okay? How are you doing?"
And then, but sometimes when somebody says, "Are you okay?" That means, let's move on. I really don't care if you're okay. I'm telling you, I'm ready to move on. But so
That's
it's how
what
you
you mean
deliver.
by that when you say it? Or
If I go to, "Are you okay?" Then the very next thing you expect to hear out of my mouth is, "Well, then why aren't you doing your job?"
Right. Okay.
But if I go, "Are you okay?" Then you feel like I actually want to know.
You care.
And so your response to that is going to give me a big clue on whether or not I could talk you out. If you're caught off guard by it, that means
Then you have a chance, maybe.
you feel like you matter to me, and that matters. Holy cow. We could have a conversation. But if I go, "Are you okay?" And they go like, "Look, don't even talk to me."
Yeah.
Or they clearly, or they put the phone down.
Right.
Like
They shut the door.
My first real, there's a bank robbery with hostages, which is actually a rare event. And the bad guy on the inside was highly manipulative, was manipulating everybody. There won't be a bank robbery with hostages and a negotiation in the U.S. one time this year, in the whole country. That's how rare it is. Bad guys get away before you show up. And this one, it'd been in New York City, it had been 20 years since the last one.
Did it used to happen more often, just because of human nature? I mean,
No, they
seems
just,
like it.
the
No?
bad guys know the cops are coming.
Oh, okay.
And so they're going to get out of it.
Got you.
So this guy, the first negotiator on the phone with him tried to connect with him, and immediately the bad guy says, "Look, you already told me you have no authority, so don't call a hearing again."
Right.
Wow.
They want to speak to someone who was a decision.
Well, he was highly manipulative.
Right.
So what he's telling us is he's not open to connecting. He was highly manipulative. The crazy set of circumstances was Lufthansa hijacking had just happened a couple weeks earlier, and this guy hijacked a plane from Europe to the U.S. just to get a ride to the U.S., which sounds stupid, but as soon as he gets there, the plane's flying over the Atlantic, and the pilots are saying, this guy wants to give up as soon as he gets there. And everybody's like, that makes no sense. Sure enough, as soon as the plane touches down, the dude's off the plane with his hands up. Like he wanted a ride to the U.S.
Right.
So we got a bank robbery later that year, and the bad guy goes, oh, this is how I get everybody off guard. So he calls the precinct and he says, we want to give up. And so everybody's like, yeah, this just happened here a couple months ago. Mm-hmm. Most of the law enforcement, the commanders, they show up just for the press conference. They figure this thing's going to be over an hour. We show up, we surround him, he's coming right out. Well, this guy, what he said was, how we want to give up is, since we don't trust the police here at the scene, give us a van so we could drive to the precinct. And we'll drive to the precinct and we'll give ourselves up there. So all these details, most of them are left out. We're just told these guys want to give up. Well, it's not a surrender plan; it's an escape plan. He wants to go mobile. Right. He thinks everybody's going to be dumb enough to say, "Oh, you're gonna drive to the next precinct 6 blocks away? Sure, go ahead. We'll meet you there." Right. That was his plan.
Right.
And so he's got everybody convinced early on. As soon as we try to connect, we're like, this guy's running a game. Now he wasn't suicidal, but he was doing everything possible to not let the negotiators connect.
Right.
Little things like he refused to give his first name because your first name is precious to you. And so you want to give it to people you trust. And you also know that people who try to connect with you want to pull your first name. So you'll drop your guard. So this guy, even when he knew that we knew what his name was, which was about 6 hours into the siege, he still said, no, that's not my name. I had talked his compadre out. And so the guy comes out and he says, no, yeah, this is the guy's real name on the inside. There aren't 7 of them. There aren't 7 of us. There are just 2. He's been lying to you about how many people are there. He's been lying to you about this. He's been lying to you about that.
Right.
And yeah, in point of fact, this is this guy's real name. So the next negotiator, we hand it off, because he surrendered to me and I'm debriefing this guy. The next negotiator gets on the phone, NYPD negotiator named Dominic, who's a brilliant closer. And he calls him by his first name. This guy goes, that's not my name. He said, look, we got Bobby out here. Bobby just told us that this is your name. But then he says, with all that, what do you want me to call you? And the guy had used a made-up name, Billy. And he says, call me Billy. And Dominic is not going to get into a verbal fist fight over a guy who's not getting away. So Dominic's like, all right, I'll call you Billy from now on. You're not going anywhere. We got you surrounded. Ultimately, you're coming out. We got enough information on you from right now.
Right. You're not getting away.
Well, more importantly, he's not suicidal.
Right.
Because a suicidal guy with hostages will kill the hostages.
Right.
But he's not suicidal. So, we don't care how long it takes. And different scenarios like that, barricaded in a place that's not your house, you're not prepared to stay there for that long. And in a bank, if the guy's not suicidal and he's not homicidal, the maximum anybody's ever going to be able to hold out is about 12 hours because you just get too tired. Imagine yourself at the end of a really long day where you were at work all day and it just ground you down. At the end of the day, you're just going to go like, all right, I'm coming out. So we know we got this, guys. And as it turned out, it was almost exactly 12 hours from when the bank alarm was triggered to when he finally surrendered.
That's fascinating.
But you're getting a reaction from the other side because they're giving you data,
Right.
and you do the read, and then you diagnose where you're going from here.
Right.
And in social media, actually applicable to your industry, both of your industries, you can pretty much get data on people within seconds. And in negotiation, I mean, I'm sure we can
I hear
talk
there's some
about
people from Bulgaria that are very good at analyzing these sorts of things. I don't know
Those
what the story
Bulgarians.
is.
Right.
the
Amazing.
Bulgarians.
Yeah.
But in negotiation and in general, when it comes down to understanding the party across from you, you could literally create the pattern of their behavior online. And it goes down to the smallest detail, including liking a post, commenting on someone else's post,
Yeah.
what you shared 10 years ago. And then you can actually create a profile. We call it a persona profile.
Right.
So I could predict, this is how marketers basically can predict who is going to buy what product, or if I need to negotiate with you, what are going to be those triggers or keywords that should be used in that negotiation in conversation with you. So I was actually fascinated. It was a great question, Peter, that you asked, because I was fascinated if we could go back in time in the 90s when you had some of the high profile cases that we've all read about.
90s when I was in grade school.
when what type of data sets would have been beneficial to you? And obviously if you had access to social media and the social media behavior of some of these people, how fascinating it would have been to understand.
That's the biggest. Yeah, go ahead.
And same goes to you as well. I mean, understanding, obviously, we talked about in one of our last episodes, when you go to the marketplace back in the day, you had to read people's behavior.
Yeah.
And now you don't really have to do that because you have all these statistics and all the data sets that you need to make decisions, but yet you are still needed. Your brain is still required to
You know
do
what
that.
though? But it was not an easy sell because, if they had their druthers, they would have probably just closed the exchange and just said, let's all be electronic. But they realized that in this market, with the volatility the way it is and the sort of the craziness happening, that the human element is all the more, at least as this is my narrative, is that the human element is all the more necessary and relevant than ever before. Because basically if you're in a situation, it's like I described, you get on a plane and you take off from JFK and everything's fine and the weather's beautiful and, you have automatic pilot and, you're not running into any unknowns. Well, do you care whether there's somebody actually in the cockpit or not? No, because you've had some confidence that they know how to take off, they know how to land, and they know how to go as far as smooth sailing goes. But how about if we end up hitting a storm? Or we have hit some bad weather. You want you want to open the door to the cockpit and know that person, knows what they're doing. I always joke about, AI. So when AI came along, I didn't know much about it. And so I was sort of curious because I speak to a lot of young people and they always say, you know what, there are going to be no jobs for us. We're going to get outsourced. AI is going to do all the, we'll have nothing to do. When we graduate high school and college, we're going to be screwed. Right. And so I partnered with this guy. There's a guy named Dan Ives. He's like one of the number one tech analysts in the world. You've seen him around. He wears these funny outfits and he and I connected. We have a show called Einstein and Ives. And he explained to me how AI is going to benefit our lives way more than it's going to have any kind of negative effect. Right. I mean, think about it. Now a doctor who is coming to do surgery on you, he's going to open you up and he's going to have had access to information that he'll be able to have seen every surgery ever done in this disease before. Mm-hmm. Right? The last thing you ever want is a surgeon to open you up and go, oh, I've never seen this before. That's a problem.
Don't know what to do now.
Right. Same thing with your business. I mean, I bet you that's probably going to be somewhat of the way of the future is that, it's all about information. Information is gold. Right? It's information is gold for me. So being a broker on the stock exchange, what made me a good broker was my ability to interact with all the humans there and just through whatever way I did it, to get a little bit of information about everybody, to know what their next move was. I guess that's what makes somebody a great card player, right? To be able to read the room. I always use an analogy that there's what makes a good, so 90% of the people who try and trade, who day trade fail. Oof. Because they let emotions and they don't know the psychology of trading, right? They get very they think they don't have a plan, right? It's all about the plan. If I have a plan, there's two kinds of traders, two kinds of gamblers. There's a gambler who's very disciplined, who walks in, he says, I've got $1,000. I'm going to sit down at the table. If I make 1,000, I'm going to walk away from the table. That was my goal. I hit my goal. I walk away from the table. I go take my kids out for a dinner at Ruth Chris, and then I go to see Celine Dion, and I go back to my room. That's a disciplined trader, gambler. The undisciplined one who has no plan at all, he sits down with $1,000. He's up 2,000. He's up 3,000. He thinks he's got diamond hands. He goes all in. He doubles his bets, triples his bets. The next thing you know, he's down $2,000, down $5,000. He's been to the ATM 5 times, and he's sitting out on the curb, drinking a Hennessy, smoking a Lucky Strike, and he doesn't have enough money to pay his rent. Those are the two different kinds of traders. And I would imagine, it's all about when we teach people to day trade, the first thing is have a plan on why are you buying or selling the stock? Who is it? Is technical analysis is the key, price action, right? Secondly, ask yourself the question, why am I in this trade? Is it FOMO, hype, hope, right? Or Uncle Herbie on the internet told me to buy it, right? No, the charts will tell you to buy it. And then what you do when you get into the trade. So it's, the information, the human, that was the end of that story with the lady who asked her grandfather her father why he stopped going to the shrink. He said, I get just as good information from ChatGPT. Her whole thing was, what is going to be our truth when all the questions we start to ask are going to be asked to a machine and not another human being, right? It's okay if you're going in for a surgery that a robot can do better than a human. But like if you're going to go in for therapy, apparently a majority of people now who need therapy are asking ChatGPT for it. And
that is
not going
correct.
to see shrinks anymore.
We just did actually a study at Reala Global Consulting, which is the business that I run, about ChatGPT. It's not only specifically using AI and other large language models, and we found that the top use of large language models is therapy.
It's therapy.
And then the second one, personal therapy, and then the second one is actually marital. So
marital.
Yes,
therapy.
marital. And then third one was obviously more skewing towards the legal side of therapy and the therapy outcomes. But yeah, it's very.
In your work as a negotiator now, are they using any of these large language models? I mean, is that?
I'm not getting that. The hostage negotiators or business negotiators?
Hostage.
Nah, the hostage guys are not.
Okay, and what about business? So you teach negotiating, right? So hostage is one part of it, and then you talk.
We don't do the hostage stuff at all anymore.
Okay, so now, but you teach people how to negotiate a deal.
Business interactions.
You do, which is extraordinary. Give me an example. Can you just sort of share? Obviously, you don't have to use names, but like what makes what are people looking for when they need help in negotiating a deal?
They're usually it's mostly getting out of their own way, being negativity. This year we got an annual summit. It's going to be in Dallas in a month, but we decided we're giving away Black Swan Global Negotiator Awards for people that have done collaborative negotiations and created extraordinary outcomes. And one of the attorneys recently we're giving the award to, they got a lawsuit getting ready to go to trial. I give a talk here in town. He's sitting back thinking like, my gut tells me that we shouldn't be going to trial. So we got a strategy called accusations audits. And because the human brain is 75% negative, then if I get a bet, you're harboring negative emotions towards me before I even say hello. The opposite of Jerry Maguire. You hated me at hello.
Yeah.
So let's lead with that. So he calls the other attorney and basically says, we probably seem like the biggest jerks out here. We probably seem like we're just not listening to you. It probably seems like my client's making unreasonable demands. And it probably seems like, and I'm paraphrasing all this here too, by the way. Mm-hmm. Probably seems like we're trying to take you hostage.
Right.
So this is a Thursday before things supposed to go to trial on Monday. And he says, let's get together for lunch this weekend and see if we can avoid going to trial. Mm. They avoid going to trial.
Wow.
And now he's talking to me. Now he's always engaged in every conversation collaboratively. He says, I'm looking for us to have mutual aha moments as opposed to aha,
Right.
But yeah, enlightenment. Like, wow, I had no idea that had happened to you. Or I had no idea that was a reason you guys did that. Now that I know that, wow, that changes everything for us. So that's what most of it is. Sit down with the other side. You're going to be harboring a bunch of negatives. You're going to be hiding really important stuff from them that if you shared it with them and you could trust them,
right,
90% of the conflict would be over and we'd be settling this. Wow. We'd be working together instead of against each other. But because the brain is wired to be negative, I'm going to assume you're trying to hurt me.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
I'm going to assume that wounding you did on purpose when there's a pretty good chance that you didn't even know you did it. So what happens if we engage in a conversation where we're not scared of each other? And then the real issue in negotiation is if you can't make me say yes.
If you can't make me say yes.
Make me say yes. Then I shouldn't be afraid to share anything.
Okay.
Because you can't make me say yes. And then you get into a larger philosophical question like, what would make me say yes? Well, I might not get my bonus. Well, that ain't making you say. You're still driving around a pretty nice car, aren't you? You're still going to make You're still going to make your mortgage payment, aren't you? Right. So people take themselves hostage if they say, "Oh my God, if I tell them this, they got leverage on me." You just took yourself hostage. So it's really, can you make me say yes? Well, if you can't, I can tell you what my deadlines are. My deadlines could be, look, if we don't make progress by Friday, I got to move on. Because I got mortgage to pay, and if you're not going to help me pay my mortgage, I'm going to go find somebody else to talk to. That's me not allowing myself to be taken hostage. So if I can convince you there's something kernel there, get them to tell you this nugget, and the better deal is there. And then our job is to teach people how to get that out of them.
Fascinating.
Wow.
It's the Black Swan Group that travels globally to actually teach people how to better negotiate.
And the books sell well in every country, which means that every culture wants to collaborate.
Right.
You can't find a culture that's not made up of human beings who their ancestors survived by collaborating.
Right.
That's how they overcame their fears. Let's get together and solve this problem together.
Right.
So everybody on Earth has descended from people who collaborated to survive.
We're all here to collaborate.
So let's think about this for a second. So the new president of the United States, who wrote a book called The Art of the Deal.
Which I read and I recommend.
Yeah. It was written by a guy I went to high school with. And his negotiating tactics are extreme and very curious. I think let's think about his negotiating tactics with tariffs, for instance, which is a fascinating thing. Mr. Trump tends to throw out a big swath. Let's say what he did with Greenland, right? He ends up going to talk about a specific scenario. He ends up going to Davos, right? Davos is an economic conference in Europe, right? So he goes to someone else's neighborhood, right? It wasn't on his turf. He goes to someone else's neighborhood, playground.
Yep.
Okay. And he shows up and with a very aggressive narrative, right? Basically, he was the least popular person in the room. When you show up or come across the pond, sit down and say to a bunch of people who are basically the European community is rather tight, right? And they are a little bit different than us. And you say, I'm going to take over this country, right? Greenland, for instance. And you make up a scenario that you're going to take them over because you don't want Russia to take them over first. And I'm saying this in response to the way the market responds to this thing. So he says, I'm going to attack Greenland, whether you like it or not. If you don't like it, I'm going to impose 100% tariff on all of you. Right. And that catches everybody off guard. So it's a very aggressive negotiating tactic, right? Market sells off 1,000 points. Within 3 or 4 hours, he goes back into the negotiating table and says, you know what, maybe we can work out a deal, right? But he's done this with many different things. He's done it with the China and tariffs. If you go back to 2025, when he started talking about tariffs in China and the whole tariff thing altogether, and the market sold off in February, March, and April almost 21%, right? And then he was going to do tariffs on every country in the world into 186%. He was going to have a tariff on China. At the end of and he got everybody off guard. He knocked everyone off their beam, right? And then he slowly, changed his scenario and said, well, maybe we can talk about it. Maybe we have a deal. That's his tact, right? And it's a fascinating negotiating tactic, is to come at a narrative really aggressively and strong and then pull it back slowly, slowly, slowly. And what he's ended up doing is he's been able to achieve all those goals if you come at somebody really strong. I mean, you see this scenario. It's sort of a curious negotiating tactic.
Well, he's found a world that's predictable. I mean, if anybody's got experience going through thick and thin,
right?
He is going through thick and thin.
Yeah.
And so he's finding the world predictable. And so, and then part of the predictability then is in person, one-on-one, he's consistently described as completely charming.
Yeah.
And collaborative.
Yeah.
Like,
the total opposite of the scene you see. We know him as.
Yeah. So, what does he look like in the media? And then the media loves to portray him as 10 times worse than he is.
Yeah.
And then what's the consistent feedback when people sit down with him one-on-one?
He's there to make a deal.
He's there to make a deal. Say what you mean. And this is going to be a two-way street.
Right.
Like you want to make a deal that's going to take advantage of me. It's not going to happen.
Right.
I'm going to make a lot of noise. I'm going to make your life very uncomfortable.
Right.
Sit down and deal with me as, one gentleman to another, and we're going to work things out.
Yeah.
And he does it over and over.
Yeah, it's
and over.
so predictable.
Yeah.
That's why it's so curious from a market perspective.
How do they get rattled?
It's amazing to think that recently we saw the Greenland thing. We've seen this scenario many times.
Seen this movie before.
We've seen this movie. That's it's a great old Wall Street term. I've seen this movie before. We saw it going back to Davos 1.0 when Trump said, he came out and he said, we're going to do tariffs in China. It was the first time he ever mentioned that. The market sold off 1,400 points. I have a photographic memory. It was 11 o'clock on a Tuesday. It was Davos, the first administration. He brought up tariffs in China. Yeah. Market sold off 1,400 points.
Right.
By definition, we went into a bear market. Uh-huh. By the end of the day, he had completely changed his tune. Right, we were not having any tariffs. In fact, China and us were we were having dinner together. We were going on vacation. You could play in my playground together. We're not taking our ball and leaving the playground. The market rallied 2,800 points and closed in bull territory. That used to take generations to happen. The market's response was aggressively down and then aggressively up. Uh-huh. It happened on February of last year when he did the same thing. It happened again 3 weeks ago with the Greenland story. And yet, mainstream media loves to play on that story. Like, oh my God, it's the end of the world. You better sell, blah, blah, blah. And literally less than 24 hours later, it's like, we have a framework. Mm-hmm. We have a plan, right? And it's so amazing. But you hit on it right away. Predictability, right? That's genius. I didn't even think of it that way.
Yeah, he caught on to how the world's going to react. So like, all right, here's how I get what I want.
And look, no disrespect to the big guy, but I guarantee he was trading that market. He was trading that predictability.
Well, and I can throw in a nice statistic that I actually analyzed in English language conversations in the whole world. In all of 2025, around tariffs were 25 million posts just in English, just about tariffs. Yeah. So about the trading aspect, because again, I analyze consumers and I analyze what they say and how that goes into back to Wall Street. Yeah. What do you think consumers did? As soon as there was a tariff discussions, I saw it with my retail clients.
Sell.
Correct. And also basically go and stock up on upcoming items. So I saw back to school came 3 months early last year.
That's right.
And we're working on strategies again with the
world's
retail
coming
clients.
to an end. We better go shopping.
And it was beautiful.
Buy
It was
toilet
beautiful. And if you look at
paper towels, the COVID thing.
yeah, and then if you look at the stock performance of most of the big retailers, they did great.
Yeah, they did great.
So again, like one
Main
tweet,
Street to Wall Street. There you go.
that is the money signal. Well, I would like to thank you guys so much for being
fun.
here. This is such an amazing episode. To all our viewers and listeners, please don't forget to follow us, and we look forward to more fun conversations.
Check out Mr. Chris Voss's books.
Yes.
Amazing.
We'll make sure to add links and
That was great.
These books are companion books. If you got one, you got to get the other.
Okay. Amazing.
thank you so much for being here.
And since I haven't read a book since The Cat in the Hat, these will be the first two books. These will be the first two books I read.
The Negotiator and the Hat.
Yeah, there you go.
I love it.
Dr. Zeus, probably a very good negotiator.
Yeah, amen.
Thank you. That
you.
was great. Thanks
It
for
was
having me.
fun.
Thank you.
Awesome.
I love it.